Now, the draft does start really at pick number 2, which we have seen a bunch of movement as well. As you sit right now at DraftKings, Will Levis minus 135 to be the number 2 overall draft pick. Tyree Wilson is sitting at plus 230. Will Anderson at plus 350. CJ Stroud also at plus 350. Your next shot on there, Anthony Richardson at 14-1. So we do have 4 guys that are, I would say, in play here at number 2. And John, listen, we're grinding this. We're looking. We're trying to figure things out. I do not know if we really and truly have a real sense of where the Texans are going to go here at 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think if you want to make Will Levis the favorite, sure, making him the odds-on favorite is something that I would kind of disagree with. I mean, this is just from 6 hours ago from Todd McShay. Nothing would totally shock me at this point. He's talking about the second overall pick, but it really sounds like the Texans will pass on the quarterbacks, which goes against everything we've thought for months. So, that's Todd McShay from 6 hours ago on something that just got posted up on their website saying he's hearing that they're going to pass on the quarterbacks.
And then you get 2 days ago, Daniel Jeremiah does a chat. Everyone asks him, "Hey, what's the deal with the CJ Stroud fall?" And he goes, "I actually don't think there will be a CJ Stroud fall." And he says that his opinion is that there were a couple of rumors that came out. Number one, this test that they gave, where he has apparently scored in the 18th percentile, where Bryce Young scored over the 90th percentile. So a big difference in those 2 guys there. There was weird little rumors starting to get floated about, and I always say unsubstantiated because all these things, it's rumor season, but his coachability was coming into question apparently with these different guys. And so that could lead to a fall for CJ Stroud. But again, Daniel Jeremiah, another guy that's kind of plugged in, says he doesn't think there actually might be a fall. He thinks people are just taking this narrative and kind of running with it here. And so Will Levis is a guy that, at least coming into the season, was tossed about as a guy that could go number 1 overall. People like his profile. They like the big, strong arm. He is the kind of prototypical NFL quarterback, big-body dude that a lot of these teams do tend to. And you know what? Actually, kind of underrated mobility as well.
He's got some athleticism to him. He's got the Josh Allen comp a couple of times.
Yes, the underrated mobility as well for him. And now at minus 135, that is kind of where we're looking right here. And we always say this time and time again, and I want to beat this over your head a million times over the course of this hour, which is, it doesn't matter what you think or what I think or what John thinks, or it's what these teams are going to do. And that's how we have to bet this, and that's how we have to try to make money. It doesn't matter who I think is a better player. It doesn't matter who I think is a better fit. And it doesn't really even matter what I think is an organization they should do, because that's kind of a big, long preface for me to say to you, John. They want to pass on a quarterback here at 2. And I hear the argument that people are saying, well, you have Caleb Williams and you have Drake May next year. Well, there's only 2 guys that are surefire first rounders next year as far as quarterbacks. There are other guys that could slip in. There's the guy, there's a clear second tier of guys that could play their way into the first round, but you have those 2 guys. So if you do pass on a quarterback here, then you are basically having to embrace the tank and assume that you are going to be one of the 2 worst teams in the NFL next year. And tanking isn't always all that easy. You end up stumbling into wins. Yeah, exactly.
Look at what they did, right? Look at where they're at, right?
And so I don't buy into this like, oh, well, they're just going to not get one this year because they'll just get one next year. I think that's making a lot of assumptions here, one of which is I think the Cardinals could be maybe the worst team in the NFL next year, especially if they just decide, hey, Kyler Murray's not going to come back because, we're 0-7, and so, what's the point in bringing him back? I think there's a couple of other teams that could be really, really poor next year as well. And so I think that them just assuming that they're going to be able to get one of these guys next year is a lot of people making a big leap here.
So, and I would agree with that. And I think if you're going to go down the path, you're making the wrong leap. The leap you should make, I think, is not, hey, they're going to skip the Texans on a quarterback at 2, so they're going to look toward next year. It's they're going to skip a quarterback at 2 because they have the 12th overall pick,
right?
And that they might try to move back up if a guy then starts to slide. I think that's the argument you're making if they're going to pass on a quarterback at this point. And that, to me, that's where it starts to make a little bit more sense. Where if we're buying that, let's say they like Will Levis, but if you read a lot of what we talked about, for the longest time, CJ Stroud has been viewed as a better prospect than him by a lot of accounts. So would you reach on him at 2, or would you take the chance, draft a good edge rusher, for example, if we believe it's going to be Anderson or Tyree out of Texas Tech, and then come back when you're coming at 12 and go, okay, let's try to trade up now. Let's try to get him if he's starting to slip. And I think that's a little bit more realistic of a possibility. To come out with an edge rusher and a quarterback, that's something that's actually probable for Houston.
I think the one thing that's interesting to point out here about this number 2 pick overall is the fact that you are betting on the number 2 draft pick to be either Will Levis or C.J. Stroud or one of these other players. It does not mean that necessarily has to be to the Texans. So that is that is kind of another wrinkle in all of this, where the Texans could decide to just move out of this pick. If we get a team, look, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's like 7 different teams here that we have linked to quarterbacks at some way, shape, or form throughout the course of this whole process. Could one of them look and say, "Hey, Texans, you're not winning anything. Your cupboard's bare. You need players. You need all this stuff. Look, let's swap. We'll give you an extra 3rd and a 5th, or so. We'll help you kind of restock here for the future." Does that become enticing to them? And again, then it would certainly be for a quarterback. It would certainly be for a Levis or a Stroud, and it doesn't necessarily mean that 2 pick has to be the Texans.
No, I think that's a really important distinction, because if you look at some of the odds when we're talking about the number 2 draft pick, Will Levis is the odds-on favorite to go there, as opposed to being the odds-on favorite to be the Texans' selection, and that's a really important distinction. But again, I would say, so I'm a fan of like basic logic, and that sounds kind of condescending, but let's look at Bryce Young, for example, right? Every single draft analyst told you in this entire process was what? Bryce Young is the best quarterback prospect.
Yes.
But the odds were fluctuating, going back and forth, and then it was C.J. Stroud, and then Anthony Richardson at one point was really hot after the combine. But the whole consistent thing, I always make the joke, it's like the meme of the 2 astronauts, like looking at the moon, like, oh, it's Bryce Young, like it always was.
Yeah.
And here it is now. So, I feel like it's the same thing. Go back to the Justin Herbert year. The entire year, all you heard was, hey, Justin Herbert is going to be behind Tua Tagovailoa. And then, a week before, what do we get? Dolphins are really in on him, actually. No, they weren't. So I think, what we're talking about, bringing this back full circle, is this entire time we've kind of heard C.J. Stroud is considered the second best prospect at quarterback, and yet for some reason now we're getting this push with Will Levis, and I tend to kind of try to push back on stuff like that.
Yeah. I actually took a nibble at Stroud at 2 overall when it got all the way to nearly $5. It was plus 470 something here in town. I was like, okay, at this point, 1 in 4 drafts do the Texans they do, and so I'll take that bet. If it's a loser, it's a loser.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.